One of the oldest playlists on this channel is the playlist on friendship, discussing the nature of friendship. In our culture, we have so many songs that are sung, so many movies that are made about love, about romantic relationships. And it's rare for people to put the same level of energy, the same level of effort into friendships. But friendships, very simply, define what you can and cannot do in your life. You could say, especially when you're young, but you think it doesn't influence middle aged people? You think it doesn't influence old people? What you can and cannot do? Can you play tennis? If you have 3 friends who play tennis, yeah, you can. Can you learn how to play tennis? Can you get good at it? Can you get into it? Yeah. Okay. Can you learn Chinese? Can you get involved with politics at City Hall? If you have 3 friends who already are involved with politics at City Hall, if you have 3 friends who already are learning Chinese, even the types of television people watch, I mean, things with a very low level of effort, well, yeah, if you have friends who already understand these things, know these things. Hey, do you guys think any of you could buy an airplane ticket and go to Cambodia and start doing humanitarian work? If you have a friend who already has lived in Cambodia, that's not so intimidating anymore, right? You have a friend who can already talk you through the paperwork you need to do or whatever. Yeah. And as you've heard me say many times in this channel, what you can do as an intellectual, what you can do as a sort of political activist, political lobbyist, as a person who cares about politics and wants to change the future of the world. Friendship matters. It matters far more than the attention we pay to it, right? And perhaps some of us suffer from obsessing over sexual relationships, but maybe we also suffer from paying too little attention to friendships. Now, I think nobody in this audience will doubt that our sexual relationships are primarily rooted in instinct, not reason. Whether or not you're attracted to someone is instinctual. What you do about that attraction is a very different question. How you cope with it, or what kind of relationship you create out of it, and all kinds of questions that you may answer intellectually and philosophically, but how you actually live your life, how you conduct yourself sexually, romantically, who you fall in love with, marry, how you live. But there is a very deep level on which I, as a heterosexual, can never be attracted to a member of the same sex. And I have certainly known gay people who could never be attracted to the opposite sex. And of course, there are bisexual people who can do it all, and I have known people who could only be attracted to fat people. And there are people who can only be attracted to skinny people. There are more peculiar elements to those instinctual relations. And I met a guy who had spent his whole life chasing after Chinese women. And I was talking to him about my philosophical attitude towards this, because I said, look, I grew up in a city. I grew up in Toronto where there were plenty of Chinese women, plenty of Korean women around, a couple of Japanese women too. Like I grew up with, in high school and what have you, and just surrounding me in the city. And I said, I've never had any fascination towards them, never had any attraction towards them, never my type. And the interesting thing about this guy's reply to me was he had grown up in a small town where there were absolutely 0 Asian people. This is somewhere in the United States where it's like 90% white, 5% Hispanic, 5% black, or something. There are in America, in the United States, there are a lot of towns like that. It's just not a cosmopolitan place at all. Anyway, but he said that when he reflected on his life, nevertheless, growing up in an almost entirely white community and school and so on, the women he was attracted to in high school looked like they could have been Asian. Like they looked like they could have been Chinese or Japanese. They were white women with certain kind of facial features and their body type and so on and so forth. And he knew what it was he found attractive about them. And that was years before he'd ever meet Asian women or start to develop an interest in Asian culture, so on and so forth. So we all admit when we talk about romantic relationships that we're talking about instinct, not exclusively, but very fundamentally. And I think people don't want to pay the same kind of attention to the instincts that are involved with friendship. Okay, why do human beings need friends? Should be clear. Why do human beings feel that they need friends? I don't mean rationally. I don't mean when you think about it, when you reflect on it. I mean, why are we a species for whom the most serious kind of punishment is to be locked in a prison cell in isolation? Solitary confinement, which I've seen some people argue seriously, they feel solitary confinement is a form of torture. I heard an interview once with a man, and he was being interrogated that way. He was being tortured to confess to a crime he hadn't committed. And he really seriously said in his own experience, he felt that solitary confinement was a kind of torture. Anyway, he described the exact scenario of what he was locked into. He was in a completely dark room where he couldn't see or hear anybody or something. Well, I am not the kind of person who liberally appeals to evolutionary psychology. I think we have to be tremendously self-aware and self-disciplined when we make claims alluding to our evolutionary past. I think we have to be aware of our tendency to indulge in self-justification, rationalization, and excuse making by pointing to a kind of fictional construct of what we imagine our evolutionary past was and how we ought to live our lives now, given that evolutionary past. So without digressing into it any length, you guys probably know there are men who, men who try to sleep with 100 different women a year and who justify this through their notion of evolution. They say, oh, well, this is how we were evolved to behave. And you can talk to another man who believes that one man should marry and commit to just one woman and raise children with her, and he can justify that. He can justify monogamy by appealing to evolutionary psychology and so on. All kinds of different extremes. I've known people in anthropology who very seriously believed that everyone was secretly homosexual. There were people who believed everyone is secretly a closeted homosexual and that thus heterosexuality is some kind of repressed dysfunction. And there were, of course, people of the opposite stripe, people who tried to make heterosexuality a definitive aspect of sanity or normalcy, and that somehow homosexuality, was delegitimized as being the result of repression or trauma, but that really these people weren't really homosexual. And then I think although in some ways it's the craziest position of all, it's at least empirically harder to debunk. There's also the popular enough notion that everyone is secretly bisexual, but that thus rendering both homosexuals and heterosexuals repressed, dysfunctional people on the premise that everyone secretly and inwardly is bisexual in their inclinations. In case you hadn't guessed, I subscribe to none of these schools of thought. I don't support any of these. But my point being, evolutionary psychology, it's a very pliant excuse-making mechanism, and you have to be really keenly aware of what your own agenda is, what your own desires are, what you might be making excuses for, consciously or unconsciously, in asking these questions and in proposing your own answers to them. So I do notice, guys. I do notice 16 people in the audience and only 8 thumbs up. I think we had about 20 thumbs up before. So if you change your mind, you can give it a thumbs up now, and then you don't like the direction this conversation is going. You might not know that, but you can click on the thumbs up again and undo the thumbs up. But clicking on thumbs up helps more people join the crowd while the discussion is ongoing. And it also helps people discover the video later on. So I do like having a live audience. I do like performing with the pressure provided to me by having a live audience this way. exe.exe says, off-topic comment, but I thought you took that 2-week break because you were watching the Kenosha trial. So guys, if you support me on Patreon, you'll know more about what's going on in my life. But no, I stopped uploading videos for 2 weeks just because I felt that one video I'd uploaded was especially important. I really wanted more people to see my video about philosophy and politics of Socrates. I still think it's a tremendously important video if you haven't seen it. go back and watch it. But even during those 2 weeks, I actually continued uploading videos, recording and uploading videos. I just didn't publish them. And actually, I have a backlog now. I have several videos that haven't been published yet, but that I created during that period of time. So anyway, thanks. Larry showed us the Socrates video and says that it was very good. So every so often I do that. I know, guys, I'm happy to have you all in the audience, but I know I have viewers who really do value my channel, but they only have enough time to come and watch a video once every 2 weeks. There are people who've loved my channel for years, but they watch every 10th video or something. And I'm uploading so much that something will get buried, something will get missed. So every so often I have to slow myself down. Although, yeah, in terms of my creative process, basically, yeah, I want to be making videos all the time, including this one. So I think, thanks for joining me. But I think you can imagine, like, if this video now were limited just to the people who are not at work today, who are able to come and watch this video today, that would be a tremendous constraint. But if you're uploading and publishing new videos every day, some of your videos are going to get buried. Anyway, so the most basic premise here that I'm borrowing from evolutionary psychology is just that there is a good reason why human beings are uncomfortable being alone. There is a good reason why even they perceive solitary confinement as a kind of torment or torture or punishment. And I would say that is because we are not evolved to be solitary predators. There are innumerable species, both on land and in the ocean, that have no social instincts whatsoever. They don't live in a troop. They don't live in a pack. They don't help one another. They don't assist one another whatsoever. And the only time they have positive contact with their own species is for sexual reproduction. So normally when they're in heat or something, they send a chemical signal and they meet and they mate, and then that's it. There are innumerable species on this earth that follow that kind of pattern. Well, human beings are not quite pack animals. We don't naturally form into flocks. We don't naturally form into schools in the sense of schools of fish. However, it is impossible for just one person to survive in the wild for long. If you are one person alone, if you do not have a troop, if you do not have a clan, if you do not have some kind of extended family-like organization of people who help you and work with you and take care of you, the common cold could be the end of your life. If you are truly living alone in a cave in prehistoric conditions or in a hut in the middle of the jungle, a very minor injury, a very minor illness could be the end of your life because you have nobody to take care of you during that short span of time. So you guys know I have experience living in the tropics, and I was living in one of the last parts of the world where some of the indigenous people were still living in tribal conditions. That was disappearing year by year. The last people with traditional lifestyles were moving to the city and so on and so on. So if you go there now, I don't know how many people still live that way, but there were still people hunting with crossbows when I was there. And I think one of the things we forget is just how different life is before refrigeration. As a vegan, I was very interested in traditional methods of growing things like soybeans. I was very interested in the vegan aspects of the diet. I guess I still am. Well, guess what? You can grow soybeans in that climate. You can grow them quite effortlessly. And they go bad in like 2 days. They become poisonous. There's no refrigeration. There's no preservative. There's no food processing. Okay, you can take the beans out of the field and you've got to eat them now. And, you start to realize why there's so much emphasis on certain types of food that can be kept, even if it's only for 2 weeks. In the tropics, potatoes do not last very long. There were kind of bacteria and things. There are tiny microorganisms that somehow find their way into your potatoes. Potatoes do not last that long, so on and so forth. So, yeah, and by the way, again, I am vegan, but you start to see why meat was so important for our survival, because it was possible to take meat. I've seen this. My ex-wife also was an anthropologist who was with groups emerging from tribal conditions. They would just kill something and hang it over the fireplace, and with no other preservatives, just the smoke rising, they would cure meat, and it could last for 6 months. Anyway, my point here again is not to glorify the conditions of our ancient ancestors, and it's also not to present you with a kind of rationalization of my own choices, my own values. I don't think that evolutionary psychology vindicates the choices I've made in my life. I don't think it vindicates my schedule of values. I think, if anything, evolutionary psychology helps to explain why people like myself are so alone. And I embrace that, and I accept that, and I understand that there is a strange kind of strength necessary, a strange kind of psychological and emotional resilience necessary to really live your life alone, to really live in defiance of social conventions, and to accept the consequences of that fact. Now, to give a very simple example, if you live in a predominantly Catholic society and you reject the Catholic Church, you're likely to find yourself alone. Now, maybe you can find the company of other dissident intellectuals who also reject the Catholic Church. Maybe that's the most wonderful thing for you. But start adding up all the conventions, all the social demands on you that you're rejecting, and you start explaining more and more why it is you're alone. And when you look at the fear of being alone, the terror people have of loneliness that I'm here suggesting to you is rooted in our instincts, is rooted in evolutionary psychology in a way totally unrelated to the romantic, erotic, reproductive instincts that we spend so much time examining and analyzing, that we spend so much time singing songs about and dancing dances about and talking to our psychiatrists and therapists about. We all obsess over human sexuality this way, right? But there's much less attention paid to loneliness, the instinct to avoid loneliness, the instinct to conform with the most unreasonable social and political demands. Like that if you live in a society of communists, to be a communist, and if you live in a society of fascists, to be a fascist, if you live in a society of Catholics or Muslims, to conform, that if you live in a society where everyone watches a certain sport, everyone watches football, soccer, baseball, to conform and go along with the crowd, even if you personally do not find it entertaining or interesting. I've known people like that. Those instincts, the instincts around the fear of loneliness and the way people approach and cling to friendship, right? Maybe that's something we're not examining nearly enough. And I'm just taking a moment to look at your comments, guys. Okay, so just interesting. Atlanta Richard says that he doesn't like the direction this discussion is going in, but he's still committed to knowing my opinion about it. Okay. Well, look, Richard, I doubt what you have to say is criticism. Why don't you just tell me what's on your mind? Because, if there's something, I'm guessing there's something you want me to address, or there's some particular question within this topic you want me to talk about. And if you mention it, it might not be the first thing I talk about. Maybe it's going to be the last thing I talk about. I can pay attention to whatever whatever your interest is that you think I'm moving away from in the direction that I'm taking in this video. So look, I'll come back to something I said earlier in the video. I'm not glorifying loneliness here. I'm not glorifying being alone. I'm not glorifying being a defiant individualist. I think I said very briefly that the friends you have determine what you can do in life. Now, I don't have to digress into a whole lot of examples here, but if you've been watching my channel for years, at one point somebody wrote into me asking for particular examples of vegan activism that wouldn't be destructive and wouldn't destroy their life, whatever. And one of the examples I remember discussing at length was setting up a pancake stand and actually getting the proper legal permission from the city government or whichever part of government handles it where you actually get a pancake stand or a waffle stand and set that up. And with maybe 5 of your colleagues, you can give away, you can sell them if you want. You can sell them for $1 each. You can sell them at a loss. I guess that's better than giving away. So sell them for $1, sell them for much less than they really would cost. And with each pancake, the way you put it, you can give the person a leaflet and say, look, this pancake doesn't contain any eggs or dairy. It's possible to make pancakes or waffles without eggs or dairy. And here's why. Because we're vegan and we think this is really important. Here's why. Just gave that as an example. I'm not saying this is the world's most brilliant example. Okay, do you have 5 friends who will do that with you? Do you have people in your life who trust you and can work with you that way? Um, I can give examples from totally different times in my life. I gave a proposal to Professor Richard Gombrich many years ago. If you don't know who Richard Gombrich is, he was at that time the most powerful scholar in Buddhist studies, research related to Buddhism. And for a period of like 50 years, he was the most, I don't know if he still is today, but whatever. He had a long career of being a very powerful and influential person. And I put together this proposal for a kind of magazine. And I just mentioned, so the magazine was going to do a few different things. But one of the things I said to him, because even in my own conversation with him, I kept mentioning to him books that had been published he'd never heard of. And he's a great and famous scholar in the field. But he doesn't know about the new books that are coming out related to Buddhism and what have you. That's partly because many of the books are published in India. Some of them are published in Hong Kong. It's hard to stay on top of that stuff, but I was, and I'd worked in the publishing industry. So I really knew, oh, but do you know there's a new book published about that here and there? So one of the driving forces for this magazine was to give you an update, whether it was every month or every 3 months, however often this magazine was. Here are all the new books that came out. And I said, including the books published in Russia. You know what I mean? There are places like this where it's just not that easy to find out unless you take the time. What are the new books being published in this field? They have brief, not even book reviews, but brief notices about all the new books coming out in this area of scholarship. And he got tremendously excited. I mean, he was mostly spending his life around very boring people with PhDs, and a certain kind of pot-smoking, lackadaisical hippie who decides to get a degree in Buddhist studies. I mean, he was around people who were not ambitious and not hardworking and not motivated the way he was. He was very excited about this idea of me setting up a magazine. But, it was just funny because in his mind, he thought I'd be doing this all alone with no encouragement and no help from him. It's like, no, like if I were, I wouldn't tell you. Like, why do you think I'm talking to you? Why do you think I made this presentation? I made like slides, like a PowerPoint presentation, gave him this pitch. It's like, and by the way, with that one, you don't need money. I mean, $100 or something. It's going to be almost, compared to eating out in a restaurant every month or something, it's not going to be very much money, a little bit more than zero money. But no, I need a couple people to work with me, like, 3 people, 5 people, 10 people would be great. No, I need colleagues. I need friends who will do this with me. What you can do and what you cannot do, it's crucially shaped by friendship. Let me just say briefly, Kevin Smith. What's the difference between me and Kevin Smith? Okay. Kevin Smith had enough friends to make the movie Clerks. Basically, everyone in that film. It's notorious. He engages in nepotism and hiring his friends, whatever. Right? He had enough. And I am not saying they were close personal friends. I don't believe they were. I've heard him talk about it. They were people he kind of sort of knew from the neighborhood he grew up in. He made phone calls around and said, "Oh, hey." No, a couple of people in that film were his close friends, and a couple of people became his close friends later because they made the movie with him. But, he was calling up, distant acquaintances to appear in this weird movie. Okay. How many people do you think I could get to collaborate with me, to participate in making a movie now in this city in Canada, the city I've been living in on and off for like 8 years, right? I came and went, but still I've got significant roots in the city now, right? I lived here and then I went to Taiwan. I lived here, I made trips back and forth. But still, so the friends you have shape what you can do. And the friends you don't have are an insuperable obstacle, right? They really define what you cannot do. Now, just say going beyond this, I'm not going to go on and on with examples, but do you guys think I have what it takes to be a drug dealer? I don't. I'm lacking one crucial variable. I don't have the friends. If you already have friends who are drug dealers and people you trust with money, people you trust, well, I'm going to give you this $1,000 and you're not going to just take it and run away. People you trust not to backstab you, literally, not to rob you, not to double cross you, not to turn you into the police, not to snitch. Like, There's a pretty significant level of, trust required by that. That's the crucial variable for whether or not you can, become a drug dealer. Okay, now think back to the person you were when you were 14 years old. At age 14, could you have become a medical doctor? Obviously, I don't mean in that year, but could you have started the process of studying to become a medical doctor? All of you know, for so many of those professions, the most crucial variable is, do you already have a parent or an aunt or an uncle who became a medical doctor? Do you have an older brother or sister? If you have a friend, if you have someone who helps you, so far more important than money. There are rich people who become drug dealers. There are poor people who become drug dealers, right? There are rich people who become medical doctors. There are poor people who become medical doctors. I just read the autobiography of a guy who was born into dire poverty, and he became a medical doctor. I could tell this whole story, and his family connections were a crucial part of that. Long story. The friends you have define what you can do and what you can't do. Even I didn't have any concept of studying Latin or Greek when I was a kid. If I'd had a friend who was interested, again, you can just imagine. If I had a friend who even taken intro to Latin, if I'd had an older brother or a friend or something, just even imagining something being a possible career, right? That's going to come from friends and your own sense of comfort in taking that risk and making that investment and going to that place. So I just mentioned some of your comments seem to me to reflect the assumption that I was going to glorify being a defiant, isolated individualist, someone who throws off social conventions and says, "No, I'm not going to watch soccer. I'm not going to watch baseball. No, I'm not going to compromise with the Catholic Church. I'm not going to be part of these things." That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm starting by talking about evolutionary psychology and the demands that we maybe don't even articulate to ourselves in private, the demands we have of friends, and that we make friends, and that we struggle against isolation with something that I think is rooted ultimately in an instinctual fear of death. The fear that if we are alone, if we are truly isolated, if we don't have a pack, if we don't have a clan or a tribe, that we will die. That we can be alone for a couple of days, but that's about it. That then we start to get antsy and to be looking around for who are our friends. Do you want to jump in, babe?
Yeah, I just want to say something that spoke to me that you said was a comment you made that as children, what friends we have will determine what we can do. And you use this example of learning to play tennis. If you have a friend that plays tennis with you, then you can play tennis. But playing alone,
right,
not having any friends who play tennis with you, then that will preclude you from playing tennis. So as children, we are able to remember times when we wanted to play and nobody was available. I know this is a very basic thing, but it doesn't stop after your childhood. A lot of people think well, once you're an adult, you get involved with raising children, you get involved with your job, but it still really matters to anything else that you want to do outside of those, and even including those endeavors if you want. So yeah, I just say that to me was
yes,
kind of thought-provoking, thinking about the difference between how you view friendship as a child and the more kind of evolutionary psychology roots.
Right. But so Melissa and I both regard playing tennis as meaningless, by the way. We're not using it as some wonderful, positive example. But if you want to play tennis, and if you want to become good at playing, if you want to become proficient, if you want to become an excellent tennis player, having friends who play tennis, of course, to motivate you, as opposed to doing it once a month or once a year, that you're really getting out and training and improving your skills and so on. It's even more important if you're talking with someone who's 40 years old. Like you have someone who's 40 years old and maybe they're trying to lose weight and improve their muscle mass. So they start playing tennis. Well, if you don't already have friends who play tennis, that's going to be incredibly hard to do. It's going to be incredibly hard to put in the effort and so on, to do it in that sense alone. Now, obviously, you can go and pay someone to be your coach, but it's not the same. It's really not. Now, okay, so that's tennis. Hey, guys, have any of you published poetry? Do you think poetry is motivated by money in the year 2021? Nobody makes money out of poetry. Nobody makes money out of poetry. you have to know people who publish poetry. You have to have a circle. And by the way, you can start your own journal. You can start your own publishing house. It's pretty cheap. If you have 5 friends who share your aesthetic taste in poetry, you have the same idea of poetry. Just 5, so it'd be 6 of you. The 6 of you have the same sense of why you should be writing and publishing poetry. Like maybe it's you have some political motivation. Maybe it's just a sense of the beauty of the language or something. Okay, now you guys can start publishing a journal. You can start collaborating and publishing each other's books. But if not, you know what I mean? In this sense, right now in the 21st century, there's no such thing as one poet. You need to have a troupe of poets. You need to have a tribe of poets to make anything happen. And again, what would motivate you to keep writing poetry and producing it to a higher and higher standard? So again, obviously, I'm not saying that this is not true of all forms of writing and publishing, but I think poetry is an especially good example. Hey guys, you want to put on a performance of Julius Caesar, William Shakespeare's Julius Caesar? Do you have enough friends to think about it? And you can talk about money, but there are a lot of things you can't buy. You can't pay for the type of camaraderie and cooperation you get by doing a project like that with friends. So friendship is productive, and the lack of friendship, the paucity of friendship, having too few friends snuffs out your creativity, snuffs out, the potential you have for production in your life or any kind. Again, whether that's studying, think about how fucking boring it is to study chemistry. And chemistry is a prerequisite to going into medicine and become a medical doctor in our terrible education system. Okay, if you have friends who are willing to study for the chemistry exam with you, now it's more like tennis. Really. So what you can and can't do, even intellectually, it's shaped by friendship in this profound way, and you're enabled and you receive positive reinforcement through friendship, so on and so forth. And I'm just telling you honestly, you can't pay a tutor to do that. If you pay a tutor and they happen to fall in love with you, that's different. You pay a tutor and they become your best friend for the rest of your life, that's different. But with many of these things, it's this profoundly important constraint that I think people don't want to examine it for exactly the reasons we're going to get into in this video, because it reveals certain kinds of weaknesses you have. It reveals the extent of your alienation from the culture you're a part of. You know what I'm saying? Like, I just say there are a lot of really tough things to reflect on when you're thinking about friendship, the friends you've had, the friends you've lost, so on and so forth. So, I want to rehearse something that I discussed with Melissa last night. And I'm going to be honest with you, I can't remember anyone ever talking about this honestly. So I don't know if there's a taboo about this or it's just I have never heard it. But I've never heard about this in fiction, in nonfiction, in someone else's YouTube video. I've never had a conversation with this. But Melissa mentioned to me last night that she still has dreams about people she was friends with in high school, and I think occasionally university, people you had some close connection with at that age and that stage of your life. And she has vivid dreams about them, and not every night, but once in a while. Even when intellectually she is aware these are people she would not want to be friends with today. Like, there are various things wrong with them. It's not a coincidence that they haven't been in touch. And I immediately respond to this with several vivid examples of my own, of people where I had some kind of close cooperative bond with them. We were friends at a certain age. And then they appeared in my dreams for years and years afterward. Even after, in some cases, I had really formed the judgment that this person was despicable. They were untrustworthy, immoral. There's someone I'd never want to talk to again. I'd never want to be friends with again. Just briefly, many of the people I went to high school with got involved in drugs and alcohol to a great extent. Some of them went to jail. There was this woman who was in love with me and she became a stripper. I don't know if she was a stripper for a year or two. I don't think it was for her career in life or something. People took on different, very strange directions with their lives after they were part of my life. And one of the examples I gave Melissa was this girl. I never had sex with her. I'm saying girl because we were both young. We were both teenagers. Whatever. She was a girl. I was a boy, but young woman, whatever you want to say. But, I had this friendship with a girl where we never had sex, but we did sleep together, literally. And we had a lot. We had this close friendship for a time, this kind of intense friendship. And at one point, she actually washed my hair. It was back when I had hair. She washed and combed my hair. Like, we touched each other and spent time together and talked about our lives and stuff. And for something like 5 years after I stopped talking to her, she did appear in my dreams, you know, and sometimes very vividly, and by the way, sorry, these were not erotic dreams. I was not fantasizing about having sex with her. I could describe some of these dreams, Now, that girl, she became the most despicable person imaginable to me. And I did talk to her several times after the friendship stopped. We bumped into each other and talked. She's someone I consider totally immoral, really, really disgusting to me. She's someone I don't just morally disapprove of her in the abstract. I can say to you honestly, she makes my skin crawl. And I'm going to choose to leave it anonymous. But there are some YouTube videos of her. She's not like a conventional YouTuber, but there are several YouTube videos of her talking. And before I made this video, I went and listened to a couple of them for just a couple of minutes. And I get the feeling, this is like she is really and I already knew that, a million years ago. Okay, my hypothesis is here. I think we do have really deep-seated instincts to form cooperative connections to other people and to work with them and live with them and support them. And I think that, so what age, what was maybe 16, 17 when I had that relationship with that girl. And again, I didn't have sex with her. I think there's an instinct to form a kind of tribe, to form a clan, to form a bond that's going to last the rest of your life, where this is a person you can literally sleep with. This is a person who can wash you and clothe you and feed you. I think I probably did cook with her a couple times. Nothing elaborate, but we ate together. It's someone you trust. This is someone who can guard you while you're sleeping. You trust that they're not going to attack you in your sleep or rob you in your sleep. And again, in terms of evolutionary time, I do not think we're evolved to form such deep intellectual and ethical relationships, such as we demand of one another in the 21st century, such as I demand of all the women in my life. And so I have very high standards for my male friends also, ethically and intellectually. And so, I have these very, very high, very, very demanding standards. I don't think we're demand to have, pardon me. I do not think we are evolved to be so demanding as that. I think we are just evolved to be seeking out and then trying to maintain for the rest of our lives relationships with people who can work on a farm with us, who can gather food and gather firewood, where you have that level of trust and cooperation. But not, and again, this is my own agenda. I mean, I have my own agenda and interest that I'm not trying to valorize with evolutionary psychology. Most people in the 21st century, they want to spend time with others who understand people who understand who I really am, people who appreciate intellectually the same things I appreciate, ethically appreciate the same things emotionally, people who have a really profound level of emotional compatibility with you. Well, I that's way beyond the point of mere survival. That's way beyond the point of merely counteracting loneliness or what I think is an evolved instinct to avoid just dying of starvation or abandonment. I think at some point we have to recognize, okay, this is way beyond the remit of what we're talking about with evolutionary psychology. But why should I have dreams about someone years after I've stopped talking to them, and years after I consciously and intellectually decided I don't want to talk with them? I don't want to be their friend. There's one song, it's a really short song by the Ramones called I Don't Want to Walk Around With You. I remember talking with this with a friend of mine. And it's a very short song. It's a very repetitious song. The entire lyrics of the songs are as follows. I don't want to walk around. Pardon me. I don't want to walk around with you. So why do you want to walk around with me? And I remember I just thought that for me, that's like primary school, in the school, like, well, you're trying to be my friend. I don't want to be your friend. Why are we haunted by dreams of these people that we may really think are despicable? But even if it doesn't go that far, where we're consciously, intellectually aware there's someone we can never be friends with, There's just no compatibility there. Intellectually, ethically, emotionally, you're not compatible as friends. I think there is a reason for this, but it's not a very good reason, and it's a reason we have to learn to overcome. That's why we're doing this video today. Why I'm leading you in this discussion, or in this set of reflections. So, okay, I'm not going to speak for myself. I'm not going to speak for Melissa now, but I'm going to speak for hypothetical members of the audience. You guys can tell me. Not too many comments, just the last couple of minutes. I'm sure this is a slightly horrifying conversation for many of you. It is. I mean, it's disturbing to think about. But, do any of you ever find that you have wistful moments of reflection in which you yearn for the friendship of people you knew in primary school, or people you knew in high school, or people you knew in university, that you maybe look back at your life and regret and think, oh, things could be better now if I had maintained this friendship, if I had maintained this relationship? Where you look back and feel that something is missing, feel that something is lost because these people aren't in your life today, or that they haven't been in your life continuously for all these years. And, maybe in that moment, you just think you lost touch. That, you didn't put the effort in. Do you ever feel that way? And I would suggest to you, maybe first thing in the morning, maybe when you've just woken up and you're still a little bit half asleep or something, you're not at your brightest. You don't have your rational mindset on to tackle the problems today. You have a wistful moment of, not just thinking whatever happened to that person, not just curiosity, but feeling that there's something missing and something lost in your life because you're not still friends with those people. And then you go on Facebook and you look at their profile. And now you're looking at the cold, clinical reality of who this person is and the life they're living. And, they very likely, they're not going to show photographs they consider embarrassing. They're going to show photographs that they feel proud of. They show them at their best. Photographs of themselves on vacation. Photographs of themselves holding up a bottle of champagne to celebrate something. Photographs of themselves with face paint on and a colored jersey, standing next to a truck, celebrating that a certain team won the football game or the baseball game. You see, like, my point being, they're showing you what they're proud of. They're showing you what they enjoy, whether that's a skiing vacation or organized sports or getting drunk or getting high. God, I've seen so many profiles on the internet, whether we're talking about Facebook or Instagram or Tinder or what have you, where the person is depicting themselves. It's a self-portrait. They're holding marijuana in one hand. They have some kind of video game in the other hand. They have plastic figurines in the background for the different types of movies and TV shows they watch. Maybe posters for some of the movies they're into. And it's like, hey, here's the stuff I own that represents what my life is all about. This is, very often you're looking at, consciously articulated autobiographical statements in the form of a photograph, whether that's Facebook, Instagram, dating website like Tinder. You go, whoa, this is who this person is. This is who they become. And this is who they want me to know them as. Maybe in reality, they're not putting up a picture of themselves vomiting in the toilet. Maybe they're actually an alcoholic and they vomit in the toilet on a regular basis for that reason. They're not showing themselves at their worst. This is them showing themselves. And then you look at that and you're struck with the contrast between this half dream, half instinct yearning that they should still be a part of your life. You should still be friends. And, the subtly horrifying reality that you guys are alienated from one another for good reasons. Now, you may look back on any one of these particular friendships. Someone you knew in high school, someone you knew in university, let's say. You may look back on a particular friendship and think you wanted to be friends, you wanted to continue the friendship, but they rejected you. And there would be another case where you look at it and you think, oh, well, really, we should have been friends, but I rejected them. Regardless, I think there's a kind of objectively real sense in which you can look at all of these failed friendships, all of these people who disappeared from your life, all these people who could have been part of your tribe and who are not, who maybe they briefly were a part of your tribe, whether it was when you were 16 or when you were 21. You had some period of time, and now you're not. Now you're estranged from one another. Whether you feel that you rejected them or that they rejected you, or that you just drifted apart, that nobody made the effort to maintain the friendship, but there was no particular rejection. Nevertheless, even in just looking at their Facebook profile, you will feel the chill of recognition that this is someone you never could have been friends with. This is someone you never could have got along with. That actually you're natural enemies, not natural allies, right? But you have this innate instinct still. Some of you guys may not feel that way. There's some biological diversity amongst us. Some people have much stronger social instincts. Some people have very strong antisocial instincts. And some people are autistic. I have some autistic members in my audience. Some of them write to me appreciatively. Like I've had autistic people write to me saying they agree with my analysis of autism. I'm not autistic, but I have made some videos talking about it. I can't say this is a universal pattern of thinking or feeling. I think it's even more important because I've never heard anyone talk about it. Nobody, not my parents, like not my other girlfriends or whatever, girlfriends prior to the girlfriend I'm currently with. I can't remember any TV show, any YouTube show. I can't remember anyone really talking about that. And I will go further to state this is not quite the same as loneliness, because I think you can wake up with these feelings. I think you can have these feelings at unguarded moments. You can sense this instinct even when your life is full of other people, even when you are busily socializing with and are integrated with other people. You can still feel it. You can still feel the sense that you should reach out to and should still be in touch with. That you should still be a tribe with these people, even though right now you have enough friends. You have a wonderful boyfriend or girlfriend, or you have 2 or 3 boyfriends or girlfriends, what have you. So I'm going to take a moment now to read comments in the audience. So Lazul Lappi says, Lazul Lappi, yes, to read the name correctly, says, quote, I had a dream about my teenage best friend just last night, and I do dream of her often, but I follow her on Instagram, and I know our friendship is better off dead. To which he adds, ah ha ha. Yeah, and look, raw intelligence is a factor. I am of the opinion that most people are stupid because they choose to lead a stupid life. Like their potential to build themselves up intellectually, whether that's in their teenage years, their 20s, their 30s, their 40s, in any given decade of their life, that they're dissipating and wasting their potential to make themselves into a more substantive person intellectually. So I see stupidity as a process and as a product of an ongoing process more than I see it as an innate trait. However, some people are born severely mentally disabled. Sometimes you're looking at an innate trait, a characteristic that prevents you from developing intellectually. But if you just think about the mass of people you knew in high school, like who you knew at all, you had a single conversation with, you think about the mass of people you knew in university, the vast majority of them are just too stupid for you to be interested in having a friendship with them today. And many of them are too crazy for you to be interested in having a friendship with them today. Now, beyond that, if you think, so there's this huge survey of people you remember and half remember. If you think about the few exceptions, really intelligent people who happen to be in your high school or happen to be in your university, I think if you just try to separate those couple of people, you never had friendships with them or you didn't maintain a friendship with them, and then you think about who they are and their values. Like I knew a couple of very smart guys who went into computer programming. I don't miss them. I don't look back on that with any regret. I can't look back now and say they were in some sense, they were some of the smartest people I ever met in high school or university. but I don't respect what they've done with their lives. I'm not interested in this. And they don't know about history and politics and the things I care about. They're not going to have a conversation with me about the things I care about. And probably vice versa is true. Probably they would not want to sit down and have a conversation with me about Buddhism or politics or the history of the American Constitution or whatever it is I'm researching or care about at the time. And look, so I mean that's one type of person. I knew people who went into the theater. But again, where I just do not have anything in common that way. But sure, I know intelligence. It makes us all uncomfortable to kind of quantify intelligence. But even if you're just looking at a dating app, even if you're looking at Tinder or one of these dating apps, of course you're quantifying intelligence all the time. And you may be doing it very imperfectly, and you may be doing it inaccurately. Someone who has a photograph of themselves holding a jug of beer and laughing and screaming, they might actually be a very intelligent person, but you're looking at that image, you're judging them, you're looking at their tattoos and judging them, so yeah. And again, I don't think this side of the game can be referred to um, evolutionary psychology. I don't think we can rationalize these choices we make because probably all we're evolved to do is to try to create a tribe of people that we can trust enough to gather firewood together. And even, you leave one person to tend the fire. Okay, you keep the fire going. It's very hard to light a fire in terms of evolutionary time, in terms of prehistory or the last several thousand years. Okay, you have to keep the fire going while we go and do this other chore, do this other task, or we bring the food or something. Just people you can work with on that level is what I think we instinctually desire, and what we're terrified of lacking. You know, you guys may know. So anyway, so look, great question. Eamon Flame here asks, do people have to be intelligent to be your friend? Question mark. What if someone is just nice? Why can't they be your friend? Go back on my channel and look up the debate I did with Mod Vegan. So obviously that's her YouTube name, not her government name or what have you. I don't know if I can even remember her real first name at this point. Anyway, when I returned to Canada, it was completely reasonable for me to expect that Mod Vegan was going to be one of my few friends here in Canada. You can list off all the things we have in common. Oh yes, so Melora remembers. Margaret was her first name. I had forgotten, actually. Genuinely, I'd forgotten her first name. It's been a long time since I talked to her. It's been like maybe 4 years, 3.5 years. Anyway, that's a link to just a video I did with her. So anyway, you can make a list of things I have in common with her, like veganism. She's also a parent. I think she and I are about the same age. Also, she's in an age gap relationship, the same as her. I think her husband is 14 years older than her. My girlfriend and the presumed second wife is 14 years younger than me, and so on. We have a whole lot of things in common. She's not my friend. She's never going to be my friend. And sure, she's think about intelligence, think about ethics, think about emotional character. It's kind of those three categories: the intellectual, the ethical, the emotional. We're not compatible. But if we were actually on a desert island, our great idiom, especially as vegans, of course she's someone I could trust to chop lumber. You know what I mean? She's someone I could live with and cooperate with on that level. But what we're into, obviously, she also thought what I had to say about drug addiction was morally despicable. So I have a more recent video that also talks about that. I mean, she considered me morally despicable basically because I want cocaine and heroin to be illegal. Yeah, well, I have a very mainstream view on that in many ways. You could say I have a conservative view, but I don't have the extreme left-wing view. So, that illustrates the gap between us. But, so if you're the question you ask is, does someone have to be intelligent to be your friend? The answer is yes. And I think if someone were my friend for more than just a few days, no, it wouldn't work if they aren't at a very high level in all three of those categories: intellectual character, ethical character, and emotional character. Yeah.
I was just going to say, even in the realm of evolutionary psychology, stupidity is dangerous. And if you have an injury and you need somebody to gather food, so that you don't starve to death while you're injured, it does matter to have sheer intelligence on that level, I think. So I know you've made this contrast between like what is evolutionarily a factor in who we want to be around, who will be a member of our clan. But I think there's also something to how today we really care about the ethical, intellectual qualities of people. I think it does kind of relate, because if somebody is really stupid, it's dangerous to be around them. In a lot
Yes,
of ways.
sure.
So, if somebody's watching the fire, you need them to not catch other things on fire, not catch the belongings.
I just think you have to admit that's a much lower bar than we actually impose on our friends. That we and look, guys, if we're being all the way honest, women have much higher demands of their friends than of the men they fall in love with. I mean, women are so demanding of their other female friends. She has to agree with you on everything, politically, ethically, but she can, like, a woman can be a teetotaler. Teetotaler is a fancy word for she drinks no alcohol at all. No alcohol, no drugs. And she can fall in love with a guy who drinks beer every Friday and Saturday. She's like, oh, well, I love him. He'll be okay. He's coming around. I can help him. Like, she'll make every fucking excuse in the world for the guy whose dick she's sucking. But like her best friend since high school, it's like, that bitch is trying to destroy me. Some woman who's been your best friend since high school, she's drinking beer on the weekend and you judge her and you hate her and you can't trust her. Like, as a pattern, a lot of people, the exacting standards and requirements they apply to their friends are much higher than their lovers, precisely because love itself, romantic love, the erotic impulse, motivates you to make excuses for those people. Now, I do think, the stereotype that men are better at making friends and maintaining friendships, I think there is some truth to that. Some. Go on, what do you say?
Just think of that drug dealer example.
Yeah. Right.
You need a certain
Right.
level of intelligence for the people that you're going to have in your brain.
As you said, use some very stereotypical male roles. There are men who have friends that they knew from the army, and they go bowling together, and they know they're dumb, and they know they have PTSD and stuff. Like, oh yeah, Brad, I was, somebody they were on assignment with in Afghanistan. So no, I think people do accept stupid. Like, I'm not saying you should. But I think you're taking the evolutionary psychology argument in precisely the way I warned you not to. No, because you see how easy it is, though. I think it's a good example. She has totally good intentions, but it's easy to slip into a kind of self-justifying mentality where, like, oh, well, like, you personally, you have a bias, you have an agenda. You want to justify selecting more intelligent people to be your friends, and then you're trying to attribute this to evolution. But anyway, I think it's very easy. People want to justify their own sex lives. There are men who sleep with prostitutes who will give you a cold, calculating justification that paying for sex with prostitutes is justified by evolutionary psychology. And again, there are people who live in celibacy and just marry one person and have no sex out of marriage, and they justify that in terms of evolutionary psychology. And I've had hate mail from those people. I think they're incredibly stupid. But I've had that. So, guys, by the way, if you have a moment, hit the thumbs up button. It'll help more people discover the video. And if you actually know someone who'd benefit from joining this conversation, if you have a friend you hate and never want to talk to again, you can send the link to this this discussion about the nature of friendships and the implications of these things. Someone can send this link to Margaret. Hey, Eisel just said you're a piece of shit, Margaret, and you guys can never be friends. But it's true. Look, I obviously, on some level, I regret losing Margaret as a friend. On another level, I just know it's not possible for us to be friends. So it's ridiculous regretting it. I know it's going to sound weird, but it's just as absurd as regretting that I am not friends with a statue made of stone. It's really, the alienation is that deep and it's that profound. There's no way I can be friends with that person. And I don't do this. I'm just being honest with you. I do not go to Facebook and look through the profiles of people I knew in high school, university. I'm just being honest with you. I'm not a member of any groups where I could do that. Like for some of you, that's easy because you're like, you may be members of a Facebook group, which is specifically for people who went to high school and graduated in the same year as you, or people who went to your college. For some of you, it's one mouse click away to that. I've never done that. But, however, there are specific people where I've looked up YouTube videos they've made and this kind of thing, where I've found their web presence, their intentionally created public web presence, and you have that sense of coldness. But I think that is the same thing as recognizing I could no more be friends with this person than with a statue made of stone. See, to me, the degree of mutual alienation is that real, and the impossibility of moving past it or moving beyond it. Okay, so Atlanta Richard asks, and I did encourage this guy to specify what it was he wanted me to talk about earlier. He says, quote, "What about the way many of us compartmentalize friends? What is a real or true friends? When is appropriate to say she or he used to be my friend?" So I'm just going to be 100% honest with you, Richard. And sadly, some of these problems do come down to semantics because other people may not use the word friend in the same way I do. Implicitly in everything I've said up to this point in the video, I've treated friendship as something totally separate from work, from employment. I think that work gives people a kind of false friendship. You can be a taxi driver, you can work in an office, and it's like, okay, there's this person, they're my coworker, they're also employed by this company, and I am going to trust them just to do this task with me, just to accomplish this task, and then we're done. We're done here. I don't talk to you. I don't like you. I don't trust you. I don't know your political opinions, and I don't care. And those relationships can go on for decades. I mean, you can know someone for 10 years at work in what you call like a compartmentalized way. And then some people blend business with pleasure. Like this is someone you know from work, but you invited them to your wedding, whatever it is. I get it. This is someone from work, but sometimes you go out and drink alcohol together. I don't think that's evil, but I think that a lot of people have a kind of false friendship in their life that is produced by the workplace. And if they even just stop and think about it for a minute, they'll be able to recognize, well, a work colleague is not a friend. Now, of course, by the way, someone you met at work could become your friend. I'm not saying that's impossible, nor that there's even any barrier to that. But when you talk about a compartmentalized friendship, that's what I think of as a totally false friendship in that sense, because it's someone who you can work with on a particular task, someone you can trust and appreciate only in relation to accomplishing that task. So by the way, I copied and pasted a comment from Lucas, one of my long-term supporters. So if you scroll up slightly, you should see this. Lucas wrote in and said, quote, "In his opinion, in Europe, most cultural activities like poetry and theater are heavily state financed, i.e. you have to know which bureaucrat gives out grant money and how the process works." I grew up in Toronto, and look, the best word we have for this in English is nepotism. Literally, nepotism means that you rely on blood relations, aunts and uncles and grandparents. But we also use it more broadly to mean personal connections. The arts in Canada, in Toronto, they were nepotistic to an unbelievable extent, people using friends and connections. So you say bureaucrats. It's not always bureaucrats, but it is people who know people. And yes, that does include filling out application forms to get grant money from the government. Oh God. But even renting the space, just renting the theater where the performance is going to happen. Yeah, it's horrifying. And that explains why so many of the things put on stage are terrible and have no audience. There's all this awful live theater, and you can't believe anyone ever made the effort to put it on. Growing up in the context I grew up in, I'm not aware of a single example where something positive came out of that kind of nepotism. But yeah, no, this is a massive factor you're talking about. So in anthropology, it's a much misused concept, but there's also the concept of the gift economy. Just put that here. It's very boring. Marcel Mauss and the gift economy. Now, I've read the original hypothesis, the original essay or book chapter this comes from. Actually, it was a short book. It was an essay published as a book. It's just a very short book. So the gift economy is a flattering term for bribery. What can I tell you? But there are whole parts of the economy, and yes, in Europe, in Toronto, in Montreal, your ability to accomplish things in theater, it can rely totally on a gift economy, and it's sickening. So the fact that you maybe didn't pay a bribe, but the fact that you invited someone to stay at your cottage during the summer to go on vacation with you, and that there's a kind of exchange of gifts that very often cements favors that are done for other people. And also, to a massive extent, drugs and prostitution are involved. And I'm sorry, but if we're being all the way real, people do cocaine together, and people sleep with prostitutes together, and people make arrangements to provide one another with prostitutes. Actually, I just read the autobiography of a guy, and he described using that in Hollywood. He got ahead very much. Like, to give an example, I'm not someone who's into Hollywood actors, but anyway, there was a famous Hollywood actor, an Oscar award-winning Hollywood actor, and one of the ways he got this guy on his side and got him to do favors for him, which led to him being able to do different film projects, was simply that he hired, he described her as an incredibly gorgeous Chinese prostitute who had been working as a Las Vegas dancing girl. This is a high-end prostitute from Las Vegas who also did dancing. And he just had her sit in his car as he pulled up to this guy's office window and tried to arrange a meeting. And the actor went for it. I mean, this woman actually moved into the actor's apartment for a couple of weeks or something. And this was really bribery of this kind. So again, whether it's drugs or sex, I mean, very often it's something much uglier. Or well, I shouldn't say uglier. I mean, let's not be so judgmental here. But it's something that has more serious consequences than the mere exchange of gifts. Yeah. So anyway, look, so we've dealt with false friendship, and now we're getting into the false economy and how there is a kind of false economy connected to cultural production. Those are all real issues. However, this is basically extending out far beyond the central topic of this video. But I think also these are kind of the shadows in between which real friendship exists. So it's worth talking about. This is very much the cultural and psychological context in the midst of which we've got to talk about friendship, if it is something real at all. And look, guys, I want to say this too. The fact that you yearn for something doesn't make it real. The fact that you desire something doesn't make it real. I read an anthropological paper once, and I only read this because my ex-wife printed it out and handed it to me, and she even told me the amusing parts. You know what I mean? She was like, "Oh yeah," I forget if she circled it or just told me what pages. Told me the truth in it. I read an anthropological paper that was dealing with polyamory, open relationships, this kind of thing. And it also dealt with bisexuality within polyamory. So there's anthropology of these issues and these questions. And one of the men interviewed for this, he said, I think passionately, but irrationally, he said, have you ever seen a group of kittens rolling around on a carpet? He said, that's what he wants human nature to be like. You have a group of kittens that are all rolling around on the carpet enjoying. He said, why can't human sexuality be like that? Why can't we just have a group of people instead of just two people who love each other? Why can't we have a whole group of people who love each other and all roll around together? It's like, the kittens you're talking about, those would be brothers and sisters who are newborns, who are still literally surviving by drinking breast milk from their mother, right? Like, it's such a deeply, by the way, the article didn't say any of that. The article didn't criticize it. It just reported what he said. So, but still, as misguided and insane as that may be, I understand what it is he yearns for. He wants a sense of community, togetherness. He wants to be able to roll around with a whole bunch of people who trust and love and appreciate each other, not to have isolated, jealous, monogamous relationships. So, I get it. Like, in some ways you could say it's a beautiful dream, right? But the fact that you want it doesn't make it real. And wanting it more won't make it more real. Maybe you want something that's totally impossible. And like the fact that we have this fear of being alone built into us, which, by the way, I haven't been talking about myself. I think, if anything, I'm a very unusual person. I have complete mastery over that feeling, or I feel it much less than other people, perhaps. And I could talk about that, but it's not my own personal weakness. many, many years of my life, I've been totally alone. And I've been totally alone in countries and places where nobody speaks the same language as me, or I can't even communicate. The communication you can have is just buying groceries. Like, really, how well did I speak Laotian when I was living alone in Laos? These kinds of scenarios, where I've been able to embrace and thrive on isolation for significant parts of my life. Um, you know, so this isn't really talking about my own psychology very much, but the fact that people are afraid of being alone, the fact that they want to have friends and friendship, that doesn't mean they can, and it doesn't mean it's something real. And even if it is something ideal, it doesn't mean it's something attainable, something viable for any of us as individuals, or for the great bulk of humanity. Because in the same way that I described before, looking at those Facebook profiles and thinking, whoa, I don't want to have anything to do with this person. Okay, well, don't you think the other people who went to high school, they feel that way about me? Like, when they look at my YouTube channel or they look at my Instagram, do you think any of the people I went to high school with look at that and think, oh, wow, great, he's reading Thucydides, he's reading Aristotle, he's reading, what did we put up most recently? Plutarch's Lives. I put up on my Instagram. Now, some do. The girl I lost my virginity with, she got in touch with me, and she'd gotten a PhD in, I won't specify too much, in an area of class X. She still had some things in common with me. She's gone on and gotten married and has kids of her own and stuff. Once in a while, there are people who knew me in high school who get in touch with me, and still they respond positively to what my public image is and what I'm doing with my intellectual life. But the vast majority of people, right, that rejection is going to be mutual. And if you think, sorry, it's a brief digression, but it may be an important one for some of you. If you think that being involved with mainstream cultural crap means you won't be alone, you're wrong. Most of the people who watch anime are alone. They're lonely and they hate their lives. They don't have the friends they want, neither quantitatively nor qualitatively. The vast majority of people who drink beer and watch football are alone, are lonely, are unhappy in just this way. They don't have the quantity or quality of friends they want. So there are people who are total conformists from the day they're born to the day they die, and they don't have the kind of friendships that I have in my life, even if I can say my friends are too few, and that my friendships are too shallow, that I wish I had more friends quantitatively, and also that there was more friendship in each relationship, qualitatively. Sorry, I'm just going to read comments. Melissa, if you want to comment too, you also count as part of the audience. Melissa never comments in text form, but she gets to speak whenever she wants to speak.
I don't have anything at the moment.
So yeah, Ronald Sims says, quote, Ron is a longtime viewer of the channel, by the way. I feel I know him fairly well at this point. Ron says, quote, I'm choosy when it comes to friends. Watching this is making me feel even more steadfast in my stance, close quote. Yeah, and it's easy to forget just how awful it is to sit and listen to someone, or sit and console someone, sit and comfort someone when you really don't like them and really don't respect them and really don't want to be their friend. If some of you have been in that situation this week, you know what I mean? But, have you ever held someone's hand when they're telling you about how they cheated on their boyfriend, or, whatever it is? So something you personally don't sympathize with and don't like this person. You're like, why am I sitting here? Someone who you're expected to be friends with, but actually you despise them. For some of you, maybe you've been in that situation more often with relatives, because you're expected to be friendly with your cousin or your brother or sister or something. And you're like, look, you have all these assumptions about me and how much we have in common, but really, you don't want to be with them. So that's one thing. But of course, also when you're friends with someone, as we've been discussing, mostly indirectly, you are making yourself vulnerable, and they can rob you, and they can backstab you and hurt you, but they can also just literally steal things from you. You're opening yourself up to a lot of really negative experiences, which again, some of you will have had, where you tried to be friends with someone and they stole your bike. It can be as simple as that. So, but again, for many of us, if it's been many years, if you haven't had that kind of experience for years and years, you may have forgotten that. But yes, there are elements of risk in friendship. Friendships with negative people have negative consequences. And if you have friends who are drug addicts, yes, in an indirect sense, you can talk about the fear that you end up becoming a drug addict yourself, or you end up becoming implicated in their crimes, like the police are questioning you because your friends have been committing crimes. That's one kind of fear. But also, do you actually want to sit there and hold their hand and comfort them when they're dealing with drug addict shit? Like, do you really love them or appreciate them or, respect them enough to do that? Or are you sitting there thinking, look, to me, you're just a despicable person? You guys might not remember 50 Cent made an autobiographical movie about his life, and it's a very brief scene. But he has his girlfriend at the time just revile him. He's on painkillers. He's on prescription painkillers, some kind of opiate. And she says to him, look, are you going to stop using these drugs? Because when I look at you now, I just see a weak person. And he breaks down crying. But he does. He quits the drugs. He quits using the painkillers. So, it's a momentous turning point in his life in various ways. It's just harsh because he actually was recovering from injuries when he was on these painkillers, but they made him mindless or whatever. He was snowballed out of his brain on these painkillers. So, just how awful it is to pretend to be friends with someone you're not friends with, you may have forgotten. And that's reciprocal. It could be awful for someone else to hold your hand. It could be awful for someone else to comfort you in that way, So again, Lakiss comments, quote, maybe this subject also somewhat ties into the religion discussion. I've done some long videos recently talking about religion and atheism. Quote, having someone of the same faith provides a community without actually being close to these other people, not really being friends, the other people who are part of your faith group. I would refer that back to my concept of work again. There is a lot of work in religious communities where it's just, okay, we're going to put up this tent, okay, we're going to organize these hot dogs and this, barbecue grill. People do those things together. And again, I think it gives them a type of false friendship that is just the product of work. And again, I'm not saying it's evil, but it can certainly be misleading. So I would say the work of religion in that sense gives people a semblance of friendship without actually giving them friends. And look, again, something implicit in this whole video, I'm very much opposed to attitudes of entitlement. I do not feel entitled to have friends. I do not feel that my high school owes me friends or people even potentially could be my friends. Think about what the high school principal, what the high school bureaucrats are trying to accomplish. Think about the university. I know it may sound like an easy thing to say nobody owes you any friends, but we're not raised that way. By television, by movies, and also by our own parents. Most of us are taught that we are entitled to friends, that there's some obligation of other people to be friends with us, and that we're obliged to be friends with other people too. Many people will tell you that the primary purpose of high school and university is to make these friends who will last the rest of your lives. But again, if I look at, just mentally, I think of the Facebook profiles of all the people I went to high school with, all the people I went to university with. Again, I've never actually done that, but kind of in your mind's eye, you imagine this list of these things. Why would there even be a single person who is of an intellectual character that would merit my friendship? What are the odds that there would even be one person who went to the same high school, university with me, who intellectually would be, could be, should be my friend? And then ethically, because someone could be quite brilliant, but they're evil. I've known people, okay? And then emotionally, right? What if someone, it's not intellectually, they're good enough for you. Ethically, they're good enough for you. But emotionally, they're an asshole. They're a terrible person. They're a terrible friend to you. They can't share your life emotionally. It is incredibly unlikely. You'll have even a single friend that lasts the rest of your life who happened to go to the same high school, university. Now, when you talk about the workplace, you're normally talking about a relatively tiny number of people you meet. You might work with 10 other people. Why would any of them be friends with you? And I've known a few people, by the way, who struggle with that. Again, I kind of don't want to give away who I'm talking about here, but I mean, I knew people who made sacrifices to work in a very specialized field of research, like a very specialized area of studies or of kind of social work, of political outreach work or something. And they were expecting to meet wonderful people that have a lot in common with, because these other people who chose to study in that area or who chose to try to help people and change the world in that area, like more politically or in terms of charity work. And they get there and nobody's your friend. Nobody, you then deal with the great coldness of middle age, and that have fewer friends than you had before in high school. You have fewer friends of the people in your field of study or in your profession who you were expecting to have so much in common with. You'd say, oh, wow, these people, my colleagues, I have less in common with them than the random selection of people I happen to go to high school with, happen to go to university with. That can be a horrifying thing, and that many of us have to then live with for decades, the rest of our lives. So we have quite a number of intelligent comments here. Quote, relationships in the modern age are far more important for personal connections of this kind. So what makes someone a real friend? Comma, I would say it is all about how they make you feel. Close quote. Well, I disagree, because, the title of this video is Friendship. Your mind is playing tricks on you. How you feel, your mind can really play tricks on you for all the reasons I talked about in the first hour of this video. And the fact that you feel that you need a friend, or you feel loved or cared for, or you feel that you can trust this person. Feelings are usually wrong, and they can prove to be wrong with time, with devastating effects for you. And look, again, most people are not intellectuals. Tana Mongeau lives her life on the basis of feelings. She's someone who cares a lot about friendship. It doesn't matter, she talks about it a lot. She's someone who has defined her life in terms of the friends she gathers around herself. She's probably much closer to being an ordinary person than I am, with the exception that she's fabulously wealthy. So she doesn't have to worry about earning money, so on and so forth. But, no, I don't think you can judge friendship on how you feel. And I think, on the contrary, your mind will play tricks on you. And sorry, no offense, but it's quite possible in your own life, your mind is playing tricks on you much more than you know. And again, you might, anyway, you don't necessarily know how those people you call friends feel about you. And you don't know to what extent your feelings are the shadow cast by your own needs, your own fears, your own insecurities, and, as I say, your own instincts. Okay, so the same person comments, quote, you can disagree about certain moral and intellectual issues, yes, but if they truly make you feel comfortable and you feel that you can be open with no problem, that's enough, sir. When I lived in Vientiane, the capital city of Laos, there were a lot of older men with years of work experience who were interesting guys who had things they could teach me, and they wanted to be my friends. They wanted to sit around and talk. They wanted to drink beer and talk to me, but I don't drink alcohol. I was not willing to be friends with them because they slept with prostitutes. So these were older white men, some of them British, some of them Australian, some of them other ethnicities, but these were white Europeans. And they're sleeping with teenage Asian prostitutes from Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, this kind of, maybe some from Vietnam. Ethical differences matter, Now, conversely, who were the people living in celibacy? Who were the people living the kind of resolute, sober, self-disciplined lifestyle I lived myself? They were Christian missionaries. I couldn't be friends with them. I did not feel I could be friends with someone who was a Protestant missionary or a Catholic missionary who had come to this country to destroy its indigenous cultures, to convert people to this religion that I consider despicable. However, in terms of how they actually lived their lives, those were the only people who were refusing to sleep with prostitutes, and also generally drinking very little alcohol or completely refusing to drink alcohol, right? So most of the people I could have been friends with or could have been colleagues with, I rejected, you know. Now, again, I mentioned this more than an hour ago. It's difficult to be honest with yourself about just how high your demands are of your friends. There is this example, this particular situation I was in when I was still a very young man. I had just finished my last year of university. So it was a couple months after I completed my last university courses, and I was invited to give a lecture in front of a live audience. And I forget if there were 30 people in the audience, but it was not a big audience. It wasn't that big a room in the university we rented for the event. I was supposed to give a lecture about history and politics, to introduce a special speaker who had been invited, who was the author of a book, who was going to talk about the book. So I got up and I gave an unscripted, I'd thought about what I was going to say, but I gave an unscripted and spontaneous uh, lecture. And the audience was completely silent while I was speaking. And they applauded at the end. You can imagine, I'm kind of good at talking. But during it, at one moment, the silence was broken when my girlfriend of that time, a girlfriend I was in a very high commitment, loving relationship with, where I assumed we were going to go on to get married and so on and so forth. It was a super high commitment, long-term relationship. She laughed. She laughed at me in a mocking way during the lecture, you know. Now, what actually happened? I was in the lecture. Partly, I'm speaking to introduce the author, and I used the term. I referred to the book she had written as a seminal work in the field, which is standard academic parlance. And my girlfriend was sitting next to this, someone who was basically an acquaintance of hers, but who had been a friend of mine. And between the two of them, whispering, but you can kind of hear that in a hall like that. It's not that big a hall. They whispered, they made a dick joke about the word seminal. Seminal has more than one meaning. It's a seminal work. And then she laughed at me in a mocking way, and you can hear that. And again, I'm a very experienced, self-confident public speaker now. I was a much younger man at that time. But to have someone you love and you trust laugh at you in a mocking way during the lecture, I didn't get mad at her. I didn't stop I didn't interrupt my lecture. I didn't get stage fright or stop working at that time. But when it was over, after the whole event was over, not at that moment when I finished giving everything, but this heard the lecture from the woman I'd introduced and so on. But when we were outside on the sidewalk after the was over, I said, "Look, I'm breaking up with you. This relationship is over. Like I never want to speak to you again." And I said to her very simply, "Look, the joke, the laugh you had at that moment in the silence was giving the lecture. If I had done that to you, how would you feel?" Because I knew her. She was not a self-confident person like me. She wasn't a gifted public speaker. I say, you would have broken down crying. And you would have been furious with me. You would be throwing a lamp at me or something. You'd be throwing dishes at me. You would be, she had a violent temper. That girlfriend too. She had a lot of bad characters. I know what kind of fury you would have toward me if I had laughed at you that way, the same tone and everything. And, no, if you love me and you support me and you're there, you're hearing me give this lecture to support me. It's not really that she's interested in hearing the lecture. If you're there as my woman, as my girl, this is totally unacceptable. Now, she did beg and plead and negotiate her way back into having another chance at the relationship. But I've got to tell you, looking back now, I was completely right to want to dump her. I wish I dumped her that day and never spoken to her again. Just being 100% honest, looking back at what the rest of that relationship was like. This is a momentary lapse. It's a moment, it shows bad judgment on her character or whatever, but it tells you a lot about her. And it tells you a lot about what her attitude was toward me, and that she really had a kind of punitive and mean attitude towards me. I've dealt with this with several women who really loved me. She loved me, that girl. And she loved me, and she had a erotic obsession with me. She was very turned on by me and so on in terms of chemistry. But she also really wanted to hurt me and really wanted to take me down a peg. And it came out all the time in different ways. This sense of her wanting to have revenge against me, and her resenting that I was more intelligent than her, and her wanting to somehow hurt me. That this is major thing in the relationship. And that moment really showed that. Now, look, so this tells you a lot about my intellectual character too. I'm incredibly demanding of my friends. I'm incredibly demanding of my lovers. I don't lower my standards for anyone. And by the way, if you think I lower my standards for my brothers or my sisters, for my cousins or my aunts and uncles, no. Like I judge everyone equally. And it's like either you live up to my standards or you don't. And I'm at peace with that. If you're not at peace with that, we shouldn't be friends, you know. But my point here is this. I am never going to attempt to vindicate my values and what I'm just here admitting to you, explain to you. I am never going to try to vindicate that in terms of evolutionary psychology. If the survival of our species depended on having such a high level of intellectual compatibility, such a high level of emotional compatibility, such a high level of ethical compatibility, as I demand from everyone in my life, right? The species couldn't possibly exist. No, we're evolved to try to form deep, lasting cooperative bonds with people that we trust enough to go and gather firewood. Okay, you're on my side, you're on my team, you're part of my tribe. We're going to get firewood together. We're going to store rice together. You're not going to wait till I'm asleep and then steal all the rice out of the storage room and then run away and start your own tribe. And obviously relationships of authority then creep into this. How do we form unequal societies together? How do we raise children together? Do I trust you enough to let you babysit my kid? Think about that level of trust. So now look, so I'm now bringing myself into the equation more. We're an hour and 30 minutes in, but I haven't been talking that much about me. I'm talking about humanity in general, and I've been generalizing about a kind of average person to a large extent. I'm not averse to being alone. I think most people are ruled by a very powerful fear of being alone. I remember one of my brothers talking to me about the fact that he couldn't stand just to be alone in his own apartment for 2 days. And he had a really terrible throat infection. He was really sick, but he still had to go out and get drunk at a bar and hang around with people because he felt like, he was being honest with me, he felt he could not go for like 48 hours without spending time with other people. Now, again, maybe he's an extreme example, maybe not. Maybe he's just more honest than other people. That for him to be alone in his apartment when you're sick, and he was alone. He didn't have a girlfriend or anything at the time. Just not in general. He wasn't a guy who had trouble with that. But at that time, he didn't have a girlfriend living with him. He didn't have anyone else's apartment. To be alone in your apartment for 48 hours or 72 hours, you can't do that. Well, I am someone who is totally happy to go on a long bicycle trip alone from city to city across Thailand, Laos, and Cambodia. And where am I going when I get off my bicycle? I'm going to a library. Going to archives and manuscriptoria, collection, and go and sit alone. And I go to museums and I see stone inscriptions and to study history and study politics and study these things. And again, even if I say hi to someone on my way into the library, which was often the case, I knew the person by the desk. Oh, hi. But then that's it. Then you're alone with the book. I'm alone with, I lived a life for many, many years, many different times. I'm alone with the bicycle. I'm alone with the books. When I'm at the gym, I'm alone at the gym. Even if there are other people there, they don't talk to me. I've been very comfortable living a life totally alone, including living a life where I don't speak the same language as anyone else. Like, I can't really communicate with people in whatever the language spoken is in the country. I've been totally, totally comfortable with that. And the truth is, like, the most alone I've ever been in my life was probably here in Canada, both in Toronto and when I was attending class at University of Victoria. I would go for months where the only verbal interaction I had with somebody, I remember I made fun of this, so I started keeping track of it, was when they asked me, did I want to pay to have a bag with that? Do I want a plastic bag with it at the end? Or depending on the grocery store, do you have a discount card for the grocery? That was it. Nobody talked to me. There was no interaction. And I was happy and I was thriving. Those were positive times in my life. I'm someone who's really strong enough to be alone. And maybe that's why I'm so comfortable rejecting other people and telling them they don't live up to my standards. Maybe other people, their fear of being alone motivates them to maintain a friendship with someone, even though they drink alcohol and use drugs and sleep with prostitutes. Again, these are just kind of compromises I was not willing to make. And being honest with you, this isn't hypothetical. You can put up together a hypothetical thing like, oh, well, okay, here's this wonderful guy he's knowledgeable about these subjects. He can help you in different ways. Someone with a lot of positive redeeming traits. However, he smokes marijuana, drinks alcohol, and he sleeps with prostitutes 2 days a week. Like 2 days a week, he goes and sleeps with a prostitute. You can think about that in your mind's eye hypothetically and think that's a friendship that can work. How do you feel when you're actually sitting there face to face with that guy and talking to him? And I can do the opposite. You can talk about someone who's a brilliant scholar, who's very knowledgeable and experienced and knows wonderful things, but they are a missionary working for the Vatican, working for the Catholic Church, and this is who they are and this is what they do. You can construe a hypothetical scenario where, like, I could be friends with that person. How do you feel when you're actually sitting there talking to them? So yeah, and again, you might feel differently at a different age. Maybe when you're 50 years old, you could make some of those compromises. Maybe when you're 25 years old, you can't. There's different dimensions to that. But yeah, probably my own lack of fear of being alone, or just my own very high level of positive motivation. So at the beginning of this video, we talked about you can't learn tennis alone kind of thing, what friends you have. Well, I'm someone who did a lot of things totally alone with no teacher and no friends to help me, so on and so forth. Including studying languages, including going out, really changing my life in dramatic ways. So if anything, I would not say I am an exception to the rule. I'm not saying what we're talking about here in this conversation doesn't affect me in any way, but I'm maybe an unusually detached observer of this because it's been less of an obstruction and less of a limitation in my life than it was than it is for others. I'm just reading through your comments here. Okay, so we have a comment from HIMR Edits. So I'm glad to see I'm building up people from the HIMR fan/critic community. I don't know if anyone can be said to be a fan of HIMR, but there's probably someone who's a critic of HIMR joining us in the audience. But yeah, I'd like to think I'm the number one HIMR commentary channel at the moment. Okay, so Natasha says, quote, "Extreme extroverts are odd. I am the opposite. Tend to panic if I can't get time alone throughout the day." Well, Natasha, how would you live your life if you thought the world was going to end if you can't organize a group of political activists to carry out this set of reforms, this set of new policy initiatives you believe in? What if you, in this sense, believed in global warming? Now I'll give you a less maudlin example, a less emotionally extreme example. I don't even know how much money Melissa spent on tuition in her whole life. First, how much money in total did your parents have to spend for you to go to university? But it is many tens of thousands of dollars. Okay. If you live anywhere in the United States of America, you know all these people who went into debt or their parents saved up money their whole lives. And it's this huge issue to spend tens of thousands of dollars or hundreds of thousands of dollars to get a university education. And that education may have been very poor. It may have been worth much less than they paid for it. It's a massive social problem. And it may be something that impacts your own life directly and indirectly. Okay. It's not the end of the world. Okay. That can go on forever. That problem can get worse and worse. University can be overpriced and it can be more overpriced unless or until somebody gets organized, somebody stands up to do something about it, somebody stands up to, in a profound and sweeping way, reform and change education forever. Okay. How antisocial are you now? What if you want to have friends so that you can change the world? Like education policy, like tuition. I mean, depending on who you are and what problems you have contact with, how about prison reform? You're living in a country where the prisons are corrupt and terrible places. How about taking care of orphans? Like, there are pressing issues where in your country or in your city, orphans are in a terrible situation. And every year matters, every month matters for these orphans or these prisoners or these people going into debt for their university education. Okay. I think you can get introverted quick if you care. And again, coming back to the major leitmotif of this video, it's hard to care if you don't already have friends who care. If you don't know 5 other people who say to you, yeah, that's a big deal, somebody's got to stand up and change it. And if not you, then who? Like, I guess somebody is going to be you and me and us, right? If you don't have people who share your intellectual character, your emotional character, your ethical character, who say, yes, somebody has got to stand up and do something for these orphans, for these people in prison, for these university students, you are very unlikely to do it alone, right? But of course, conversely, it could start with you. You could be the first person to stand up, and then you could find your friends because you get motivated. So you guys already know I've made videos attacking the concept of being an introvert. So I don't need to just search for the word introvert on my channel. I think there's even a playlist for that topic, and you'll see what I have to say on that. But you know, when I was a scholar of Buddhism, was I an extrovert? When I was involved in humanitarian work, was I an extrovert? When I was studying Cree and Ojibwe at a special university called First Nations University, was I being an extrovert? I was trying to get things done. I was trying to change the world. And you can't do it alone. You can't. I mean, what is the difference between me and Kevin Smith? As a filmmaker, why haven't I made my first film yet? It's because of you, Natasha. It's because you are not friends with me. 5 people from this audience, Natasha, Joel, HMIR edits, like the 5 people in this audience who just commented most recently, you guys probably have enough talent and enough of a skill set to work with me and make a film that is better than Kevin Smith's first film, Clerks. The fact that it's better doesn't mean it'll be successful. We can make a film that's better and, it only reaches a few thousand people on YouTube or whatever, but I just say, like including and working with other people and the level of extroversion that's involved there. You guys don't have to talk to me about your sex lives. You don't. You can make a film together without that kind of trust or what have you. But most people do. I'm not joking, but most people in the theater, most people who work on films, they sit around and talk about their sex lives. They do. I think it's the same in the army. I think people are even more intimate and trusting when they have that, so-called esprit de corps. They talk about who they are and what they care about and their own heartbreak in the past or what's going on with them. I think people get to know each other intimately and form exactly that kind of friendship on a film set. You hear about it directly and indirectly in all these ways. So yeah, and look, again, sorry, just to be fair to everyone involved, when I look at other people's Tinder profile, or I look at other people's Facebook profile, or I look at other people's Instagram, all the time I think, I don't want to know this person. I don't want to be friends with this person. All the time, of course. And I completely, other people will look at my Instagram profile or my YouTube, and they'll feel that way about me. And that's great. This video is really talking about the social instincts. We're not so much talking about the antisocial instincts, but obviously they're reciprocal. And, the fact that you're attracted to one person, or the fact that I don't actually mean sexual attraction here, but the fact that you want to be friends with one person necessarily entails that you'll be repulsed by, that you'll be rejecting others. So someone else says here, this is Lakis again, quote, I wouldn't have made it through university without colleagues explaining things to me and calling my bullshit when I thought I understood something, but really different. Yeah. Close quote. Yeah. Okay. So anyway, sorry. So you guys say it's totally fine. Two people in the audience were agreeing with each other. Someone says, Isel, you are an extroverted thinker for sure. And Natasha says, quote, I think he is as well. I'm extroverted because I'm a dissident intellectual. It's because I want to change the world. Um, I really don't need friends, and I really don't emotionally, and I don't need people to respect me if I don't respect them, and so on. It's a huge thing in my life, and I know this is going to sound weird, but again, you guys don't know that side of my life. But I for years, my life consisted of going and looking at manuscripts and stone inscriptions and studying books, and just long hours with books and what kind of and writing. Where before YouTube, I thought of myself as a writer. I was writing and reading and editing other people's writing. I had a life of paper and, I would go to the National Archives, every fucking city I went to. I remember laughing about this with a friend of mine. The first place I went in Bangkok, Thailand, the first day I was in Bangkok, Thailand, I went to the National Archives, which is a giant library. That's what it is. The first place I went, that was the kind of man I was. That was how I lived. So these things, most people would stereotype them as being introverted, as being, whatever, a nerd-like character. Now, you guys can guess I never was a nerd. I was a very self-confident, very masculine, very imposing figure everywhere I went. But so why am I out meeting people and talking to people and being social with people and learning from people? It's because I'm trying to work with people. It's because I'm trying to change the world. I'm not reading those books in the library. It's not for the good of the book that I'm reading it. I'm profoundly unhappy with the status quo in all the societies I'm living in. I want the future to be different from the past and better than the past in a number of profound ways. I'm sorry, when I was involved with First Nations language research politics, I do not want the Cree and Ojibwe to go back to living the way they were living 500 years ago, right? I'm someone who wants something new and different and better in the future for them, better than what they have now, but also better than their own ancient past. Shall we say, I'm not a backward looking researcher or what have you. But the things, the type of work that dominated my life, even at the beginning of this YouTube channel, think about how many hours I spent practicing the Chinese language. Just sitting, I was also researching and writing essays for several years of the channel. Those essays, many of them are on the internet, you can read them. So, I just say, like, it's the fact that you see me doing a live stream maybe gives you an impression of me as being extremely extroverted. I'm not offended by that. But no, I mean, this isn't just some trait I have. This is a tool I hold in my hands. This is something I'm doing intentionally. This is a means to an end. Yeah, so Javier is commenting that being alone with a 2-year-old and a 7-year-old is a very different experience. Yes, and this is actually one of the reasons why I don't want to have 2 children of different ages. Giving a 2-year-old all of your attention is very different from trying to communicate with a 7-year-old at a 7-year-old's level and a 2-year-old at a 2-year-old's level simultaneously. But you guys know I have experience taking care of children and raising children and of trying to make things meaningful and engaging for a child. And I very much enjoy putting my energy to that. But yeah, there's definitely a sense in which you are never alone if you're raising children. And virtually all of the time and energy you have goes into that kind of relationship. Yeah. But parenting is not the topic of this video. Okay, so I'm gonna wrap it up, guys. I think most people are not comfortable admitting the extent to which we live our lives in the shadow of these instincts. We are haunted by these instincts. We are much more comfortable talking about erotic instincts, talking about sexual desire, talking about marriage, or even talking about cheating on your wife, cheating on your husband. People are very comfortable talking about that if you look around YouTube. To talk about loneliness, to talk about feeling alone when you're not alone, feeling the need for friends, feeling that you need to be friends with people where on an intellectual level, you're aware you really can't be friends with them or that you shouldn't be friends with them, but you still yearn for, desire that. Having the friendships you made in youth, in childhood, in your teenage years, having those friendships still haunt you in your dreams. Having a sense that the person you could be or should be relies on the friends you have, that you could have lived a better life. You could have accomplished something more if only you'd held on to those connections. And some we haven't talked about, feeling a sense that your self-worth is rooted in the friend group you have, that's perhaps limited by the friends you have, but it's also perhaps elevated by the friends you have. There's a lot of that in human nature, a lot. There are people who grow up involved in organized crime because all their friends are involved in organized crime, and they feel that's who they are, that's all they're ever going to be. And there are people who are relentless social climbers. They're born poor, but they only want to have friends who are wealthy. I mean, plays out. These are very coarse and crude examples, but there are people who put together their friend group precisely because they feel that this does, in some sense, elevate them or enable them, or it changes how they feel about themselves. When they look in the mirror, who they think they are, how they think of themselves, changes with their friend group. And maybe it's not even a group. Maybe it changes with one friend. Maybe that's how you value friendship. So yeah, I think this is an area that people are very reluctant to analyze, in part just because it reveals the weakness of your own ego. And maybe also because it's an inquiry that can never come to a conclusion. When you're inquiring into and reflecting on your own sexuality, there normally is some kind of conclusive end to the story, So you had years of questioning your sexuality and sleeping around and maybe polyamory and open relationships, or maybe cheating on your boyfriend. And then you came to a conclusion, you settled down, you got married, you found the person who's the right person for you, or you dogmatically assert this is the right person for you, and you're happily ever after. Someone else, they go through some confusion, some inquiry, some questioning, and then they conclude they want to be alone forever. I know one person like that, someone who said, no, marriage and any kind of commitment relationship, that's just not for her. She's going to be alone for the rest of her life. Or you go through whatever, you were confused about your sexuality, and then you finally figure out that you're gay, and you have a gay marriage or whatever it is, you settle down and find the person, but where there's kind of a beginning, a middle, and an end to the story about your sexuality, whether that ending is a comedy or a tragedy, however bad it is, that it comes to an end. And this question of friendship, it never ends. Again, I think this is probably reciprocal with the other thing I mentioned. When people settle down, they normally settle for less. I was joking about this earlier, where women and men also, they come to this and say, okay, this guy has some things wrong with him, but he's my man, so I'm committed to justifying or rationalizing that I accept him as he is, the good and the bad together, and we are settling down, and that is that. And I think people live with a kind of open-ended restlessness about their friends that reflects their own open-ended restlessness. Pardon me. It reflects the open-ended restlessness they feel when they look in the mirror and they think about who they are themselves. Maybe your friends can never live up to your standards. Maybe your friends will always be letting you down. Maybe you'll always be disappointed with who they are. And whether that's something as simple and palpable as you rely on your friends to show up and practice tennis with you, and they're not as enthusiastic or motivated about tennis as you are, or it's something much more intellectually sophisticated, something much more ambitious you're trying to accomplish working with your friends, and they're letting you down again and again. You have some awareness. If only I had better friends, I could accomplish something better. Again, whether it's tennis, whether it's a political movement, whether it's publishing a literary magazine, some kind of collaborative effort you're trying to make. It's not, anyway, there are complex and simple ways in which falling in love and being in a commitment relationship is enough for us, is sufficient, has a finality. It's a total answer to the question of your sexuality, even if it's an unhappy relationship, even if it's a flawed relationship, even if you cheat on each other, or some kind of polyamorous situation. There is a sense in which, okay, you had a question and you found an answer. And the very nature of commitment and settling down in that relationship, it may indeed mean that you accept things about that partner that were not what you're looking for, that are contrary to your own values, that are contrary to your own ideals. But now you love them, and love itself leads you to overlook or accept their flaws. And I think friendship, it is never reliable in this way. I think friends instead are constantly scrutinizing and evaluating one another. And I think that reflects the extent to which we're constantly scrutinizing and evaluating ourselves. Um, y- you know, as much as our culture is fascinated with the erotic instincts, as much as it dominates film, theater, song, dance, so much of our culture is about sexuality. Nevertheless, we all have a sense of what is enough. You can have a sufficient marriage, a sufficient boyfriend or girlfriend. If you need to have 2 or 3 boyfriends or girlfriends, or you need to have them of multiple genders or whatever, still, you know, there is a sense of a sufficient sexual relationship. And I don't think we ever really can have enough friendship, whether that's quantitative or qualitative. Um, and I do think that's ultimately rooted in a community building instinct of, yes, wanting to have a troop, wanting to have a tribe, wanting to have a whole group of people who will work together with you. Having people in your life that you trust to watch over you when you're asleep, to gather firewood with you, to store up food with you, people you would trust enough to help you raise children, that you can leave your child with them, that they can babysit your child, and vice versa. And, the scope of that is infinite. It's infinite both in wanting to have a larger and larger community of those trusting, loving, cooperative people who are your friends. And I think it's also infinite in terms of the depth of insight into that person's character. It's kind of an infinite in terms of the escalating levels of scrutiny of, are you really good enough for me? Are you someone I can really trust? And of course, we have progressed from merely gathering firewood to trying to publish poetry together, trying to make films together. Do you really get me, man? Do you really understand my vision in making this film? Do you and I really feel the same way about vegan activism or ecology or the reform of parliament? Think for a moment. It's a really good example. Think about the intense friendships that emerged betwixt and between people who were trying to abolish slavery together. That's a side of it that's very rarely told. Groups of friends change the history of the world. I read recently, it's not worth telling the whole context for why I read this chapter of history, but I read about the legal struggle to abolish slavery in Scotland. So at that time, there was some legal independence of Scotland as opposed to England. There still is some, to some extent they're the same country, but to some extent they operate as separate countries and separate legal systems. And you can imagine right away, there were these really passionate friendships amongst these men. As I read, I don't think there was a single woman involved. These were, predominantly wealthy white men who really felt Black people should have equality in Scotland. I mean, I know Scotland wasn't the home of that kind of racism, but there were some Black slaves in Scotland. And of course, there were boats leaving and arriving at their harbors that had Black slaves from Africa on them, and so on and so forth. And there were these men who formed very passionate friendships. And you can probably imagine also some of them came out of a Christian background, and some of them were really free-thinking, atheist, modern, scientific thinkers. And they came together and they worked very hard to mount this legal case. What I read about was just one important legal case that went on for years of, trying to kind of prove the humanity of slaves and to argue that they ought to have equal rights regardless of the color of their skin, and to, in this sense, undermine the legal basis of slavery in Scotland. Now, my point here is not that anyone did that for the sake of friendship. Maybe some did. Maybe some people got involved and contributed for years just because they had a friend who already was involved. Well, maybe some people did. But my point is that whole struggle. I mean, it's way beyond the level of trust and mutual admiration and mutual appreciation. It's way beyond the level of cooperation needed to play tennis with people. but still it is demanding. Look, I need you to wake up at 6 a.m. so we can be there for 7:30 to play tennis. I'll say, are you going to be there for me? Are you going to keep up your commitments in this friendship? It's asking a lot of people. And with a struggle like the struggle to abolish slavery over many years, yeah. But my point here is ultimately negative. If those people hadn't become friends, none of them were doing it for money, right? When you talk about my usual list of motivations, money, fame, power, respect, sex, they weren't doing it for money. They weren't doing it to get laid. They weren't doing it to get famous. Talk about people really working together, and to write and typeset and publish, articles and so on, and to press this, in the newspapers, in the court of public opinion, and also in a court of law, to do that for years together. I think it's actually a really kind of moving example of the importance of friendship. And it's an example of the kind of social progress that would not have happened without those friendships, without a particular number of friendships that we probably could research and itemize. Probably comes down to 20 guys who were friends. It might be even fewer than that. Was it 15? Was it 12? That there were a few friends who made this happen. And now you turn it around and you look at our lives of invidious mutual isolation. And now think of all the things we could have accomplished if we had, at that level of profundity, at that level of mutual trust, just 10 or 20 good friends.